Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Takahiro from Kagashima University and a professor. Sorry, I'm a professor of Kagashima University, and my research background is cultural anthropology. And I'm very excited to have such a good to make a lecture to young Mongolian generation. And I'm very grateful for Dr. Mu for his help. And first of all, I must say sorry. I was absent in the morning session because I must receive PCR test before going back to Japan. Because the Japanese government requests all the people who come into Japan to hold a certificate that they're free of COVID-19 virus. But in reality, in Japan, there are a lot of people who are infected with coronavirus. And so there are relatively high possibility the people who came into Japan and after arrived at Japan, they're infected with Japanese COVID-19 virus. And I realized that why still Japanese government requires people before arriving at Japan, they require a COVID-19 certificate. Because the Japanese people are very proud of things made in Japan. And maybe I believe that also as to COVID-19 virus, Japanese government recommend all people they should be affected by COVID-19 virus made in Japan. And this bad joke is have an important relation with today's my topic. Today's my topic is the Japanese academic system. I think that the Japanese academic system have a relatively long history and it maybe had its uniqueness and independency. Please note that I don't want to say it is good or bad. It is not so simple question. It's very complicated and multi-dimensional. And to understand that there are diverse academic systems in the world, academic aims and reasons to hold it country or I think that the diversity of academic system or academic products are relatively important, especially in the field of social science. Academic diversity is required, at least in anthropological science. And take up an example, Japan, which Ozaki knows well and is working in. And so this lecture is composed of 3 parts. The first one is self-introduction as a case study, because we Japanese anthropologists very loves to speak with case studies, and so I use my personal history as a case study. And the second part is its historical background. And the last part is current situation and a temporary conclusion. This is my self-introduction as an example output from Japanese academic system from 1990s to today. Even though it cannot be recognized as a representative, but it is anyway a case study. I was born in 1970. My theoretical background comes from project, as I mentioned before, and carrying out researches about social change in the Asian Pacific main field, Mongolia and in the Mongolia, and having making a comparison of two societies. I entered Tokyo University undergraduate course in 1989. Maybe this year, 1989, had a major importance, and entering MA course in 1993 and PhD course in 1995. And it is common for Japanese students to belong one university throughout all phases of higher education. And so, my case have a way to represent success. And I belong to a course of Kagashima, anthropology from undergraduate to PhD course. And according to the tradition of the time, I started my field research in PhD course. After finishing coursework at the literature study during MA course, because our advisor professor said so. It was obviously more difficult to create latest foreign research papers because of cost. It was very expensive because there are not Amazon or and something to download papers directly. And of course, there are no measures for research. There were no internet, and so I must go library to seek cards. And it's very exhausting. And there are little senior researcher of Mongolian pastries. It's a double meaning. In one sense, it's very easy to get promotion. But in another sense, I have no role model. And this is very contradiction. And if there are a lot of role models, maybe it will be difficult to be promoted. Maybe promotion get very slow. And so this is contradiction. But I choose Mongolia. Maybe there are only one field researchers in Japan other than me. And so after I entered the PhD course, I went to Mongolia and came to Mongolia here in 1995 autumn. I arrived in October 1995 as a Mongolian government-sponsored foreign student because I had no other idea to hold a long-term visa and was not able to speak Mongolian, even though I had learned its basic grammar in Japan for 1 year, but I had almost no chance to speak and listen real Mongolian speaking. And so at first time, it was very hard to ask, for example, ask price in Itzach. I can ask the price, but I cannot recognize the answer. Especially in our version. I couldn't understand. How would you buy no? Like that. And so during 2 years stay in Ulaanbaatar, I spent 1 year to master Mongolian language. And that half year to find out a way to carry field research in pastoral area. Then, the last half a year for field research in some places. So, at first, I had a homestay at Mongolian family for 1 year. And the family taught me a lot of spoken Mongolian. Then, after that, I stayed at foreign students' dormitory of Moise. Maybe it is still existing. So, at least there was beside of a monastery. At that time, people said it Hochinzirk. Yeah. Oh, this is photograph and spotted up by in 1996. Maybe many of young students were had not before. Maybe some of them. So this photograph and the textbook of history. I was there. This is February or March, maybe after Takahiro. Oh, this is Hochinzirk. I took a photo from the entrance of Dormitory for Foreign Students. There was Russian guys. There were a lot of Russian cars, and I saw almost every day to some people to repair the cars. So this is a photo of myself and host community. I lived there for 1 year. Okay, next topic about my field research and bachelor's. The first one, for me, the first research in bachelor year was conducted in Mongolia for 2 weeks, very short, which I took part in the research project funded by Japanese Society of Cultural Anthropology as an intern. During my stay in Mongolia, I had no research money because Mongolian government only gave me $30 per month, and I always spent it for drink. When I get $30, and next day I go to liquor shop and buy some wines, and $30 finish. And so I had no money to go to bachelor area because there were almost no public transportation because of lack of gasoline. So I had to travel countries using cheaper means for such as free riding, acquaintance machine or some means. Of course, there are rare bus or flight between Ulaanbaatar and Almaty Center. But from Almaty Center to some center, there are almost no public transportation. I was so lucky that I found a friend who was born in Ongonson of Swadraimak, and whose parents lived there as retired teachers, which were very suitable for Zhangjian because they know almost everyone who lives in the area, and where their houses are. Oh, this is my friend and their parents. This is my friend. He graduated the months of Chinese language class, and their parents. All of them are finished vaccinated. And his sister, and the younger brother, and her friend, and then also poses I took part at sometimes in such ritual. At that time, at this time, I had the chance to take part in new bag of this boy, and after that big fest, we had, of course, people drink so hard and eat in much and slept here. Yes. So I enjoyed my fieldwork and life in Ulaanbaatar. But the problem is after returning from Mongolia, how to find my job. Because I already became third grade when I returned to Tokyo, as I did not take a temporary leave during 2 years stay in Mongolia. There were a lot of factors, but the most influential factor was that the doctoral students could find an academic post with getting a degree of course doctor at that time. Moreover, doctoral students who quitted school after getting full credits were dealt almost equally with those who get PhD degree, especially in humanities and social sciences. And at that time, getting a course doctor was incredibly difficult, at least in the 1990s in Japan. Then, in reality, most of recruitment documents required MA degree or above at that time in Japanese universities. So, among doctoral students, it was said the minimum requirement was MA thesis plus 2 peer-reviewed papers on academic post. And so I also believe that in my case, it was true. As publishing a peer-reviewed paper takes several months generally, I wrote a paper which analyzed composition of pasturage herding count using inner Mongolian research data undertaken by the Manchurian government during the 1930s before I departed from Mongolia. This has a relationship with the history of Japanese academic system. Okay, as a result, after returning to Japan in 1997 September, I hurried and wrote a research paper on field research in the Mongolia first, and then Arhangai, according to chronological order of research. At first, I went to Arhangai, and next to Squat. Then, before writing on Squat paper, I became employed by Kagashima University as a tenure associate professor from 1999 April. And even now, fixed term employment as a teaching staff, not research staff, worse and common among faculties of humanities and social sciences in Japan. But the situation changed a little or maybe drastically after 2000. It is a boom of project-based research was. From 2000, I became a member of large-scale research project. It was called Oasis Project of Research Institutes of Humanities and Nature, which is newly established in Kyoto, Japan. Green's project had not a few project-based and fixed-term researchers, whereas the number of tenure posts apparently decreased simultaneously. Economic depression and the increased number of postgraduate students during the latter half of 1990s were main causes. And stop the generation gap behind me exists. The number of tenure jobs recruitment drastically decreased after 2000. Like 3 years prolonged zot in Mongolia. For me, it seemed zot. Meanwhile, it became common to get the degree of course doctor before any kind of academic post. Get the degree of course doctor before any kind of academic post. Among postgraduate students who entered school only a few years later than I. Maybe I belong to the 20th century and the younger generation belong to the 21st century. Now I got the degree of thesis doctor in 2017, compiling a lot of research papers which I already published and revising them overall. Then, that was a traditional way of getting PhD degree in Japan. But maybe I belong to the last generation. Okay, then let's go to the story of historical change of academic system in Japan. Because my way to getting a doctor thesis, a doctor degree, it is an influence of such change of academic system in Japan. Okay, when a modern centralized government under the emperor was established in 1868, academic system was also constructed in reference to the Western system, including UK, United States, France, and Germany. It was tuned for wealth and military strength according to national policy, which included invention of Japanese as a nation. Before that, Japan was divided into a lot of territories of laws, like Mongolia in Qin dynasty. The situation was almost alike. And it is a task of a new government to set up the Japanese as a nation. After the latter half of 1970s, a variety of higher education institutions were established in which lectures were made in foreign language for first several years. Then only in Japanese later. At first, foreign teachers were hired, but their salary was too expensive. So the teachers were gradually changed to Japanese. And if the teacher became Japanese, it is not convenient to use foreign language to teach. And so their language was changed into Japanese. And Japanese textbook was written. At the end of 19th century, all the academic system, which lasted until Japanese defeat of World War II, 1945. The The main characteristic of the system is multi-line. The imperial universities were placed at the top of the hierarchy. Those students were recruited from high schools, which is a liberal arts education and only accepted male students. At that time, there were a variety of higher professional schools, such as medicine, economics, technology, and education, independently from imperial university, which held only graduates. Okay, I'll talk about the origin of Japanese anthropology. Anthropological interest in Japan appears shortly after Japan's modern state was established in 1868, mainly linked with need to create Japanese national identity. Among Japanese early anthropological researchers, Tori Ryuzo is famous for his wide range of field research in East Asia, including in the Mongolia. Tori's main interest was origin of Japanese people, which was a common theme at that time. His academic ground is like this. Born in 1870 as a son of affluent of tobacco merchant, he left elementary school and studied at home from private teachers who were working at middle school, then became interested in anthropology. He became an assistant of Tokyo Imperial University after first research at Liaotung Peninsula in 1895. It was just after the war between Qin and Japan. He received, I cannot read French, all this term academic maybe in 1920 because he wrote a lot of papers in French, especially about southwestern part of China because French people are interested in that area as they colonized Vietnam. And so it was highly valued to them. Got a degree of thesis doctor next year by a book about the history of Manchurian law by Japanese government. This is a photo of 40 years old. He's 30 years old, and maybe there are no novels of in the Mongolia. It was taken in uh, in Palace of King, maybe in Hongqin district in the Mongolia, because his wife was working as a teacher. And this is the Japanese interest in Mongolia. In Japan, the order of the domain at the target to research as foreign. At first, Buddhism. First, Japanese Buddhism, the scripts were almost imported from China. But after modern age, they found that Chinese scripts had a lot of incorrect parts, and so they wanted Tibetan scripts. But it was very difficult to to go to Tibet directly, and so they wanted Tibetan scripts from Mongolians. And the next intelligence is a big. It is because there are presence of Russia and Japan were very afraid of Russian invasion. And next anthropology. The first contact with Mongolia was made by Hogwarts culture. He's a Buddhist monk. And he went to Beijing and Shanxi in northern Mongolia. And his original interest was to make an alliance with Tibetan Buddhists. Tori Ryuzo carried his first field research in Mongolia in 1906 as his wife chose Gunsenor were the king of Eastern in the Mongolia, very famous for who tried to modernize his territory. For example, educational system or army system, and they asked for Japanese to help him. And as his wife taught at Gunsenor Girls School and could speak Mongolian language. In general, his research was mainly focused on archaeological one because at that time archaeology and anthropology was not divided. And maybe in some countries it is still existed at one department. Maybe more in the truth. I think it is true. But anyway, the user was interested in Mongolian manners and customs. And his archaeological research in Mongolia was succeeded by Egami Namiro. He is also very famous archaeologist in Japan who discussed the origin of Japanese emperor's nomadic horsemen after Japanese defeat of World War II. Very famous in Japan. These are photos taken by Egami in 1931 during his expedition to Inner Mongolia. The left one is a trading post of, and this is a bandit Gigenson in Shirinpot. During 1930s to 40s, a lot of Japanese researchers, including colonial officers, carried out field research in Eastern and Central Inner Mongolia, although not a few research data were lost after the war. Then, at the same time, after the war, at the same time, reform of academic system what happened in Japan in 1949. And as a result, a former mass-track academic system was criticized by general headquarters, it means the US group, that it acted as a mechanism to strengthen existing social class. That is, the higher social class people go to imperial universities, and relatively poor people go to the School of Medicine or education, or even more much poorer people go to military school or become an officer. And straight existed, and they criticized the academic system, teaching system has a problem, and so they tried to change it. And the slogan was equalization, to make it equal. As a means of equalization, it is reformed to the single track system from elementary school, junior high school, senior high school. The junior high school and senior high schools belong to middle education and higher education for university. And as a result, at least one national university was established in the prefecture. Japan has 47 prefectures. By unifying imperial universities and high schools, high professional schools, teacher schools, and so on. For example, our Kagashima University was established at that time, collecting local high schools, and medical school, and school for agriculture and forestry, and a school for teacher, and for schools were reformed into one university. And at the same time, number of private universities increased. Okay, the next I want to talk about what changed to change so. Academic year, even today, academic year is still unchanged from 19th century. As Japanese budget year also starts at April. So most of newly employed teaching staff also enter at April 1st. And there is two ways to get PhD degree: thesis doctor and course doctor. But the thesis doctor is getting more minor, getting more and more minor after 2000s, as the government started to encourage universities to give a course doctor degree in the minimum course term, 3 years. But in reality, in anthropological code, it is very difficult to get course doctor in 3 years. Maybe it takes 4 or 5 years. As we were advisors require us to carry out the field research at least 1 year. And its curriculum is basically targeted at Japanese native speakers, as most of students are Japanese youngsters. Also, Japanese local academic associations are active. This is another reason to hold relative independency of Japanese academic system. Let me introduce the number of universities in Japan. As for April last year, there are 788 universities in Japan, and 4/3 of which are private university. And 627 universities have at least one graduate school. All the national universities have a graduate school, and 87% of public university and 77% of private university have graduate school. The students of technology is the most in ML course, but students of health science is the most in PhD, because in Japanese educational system of medicine, to finish undergraduate course, it takes 6 years, and so after graduating course of medicine, they enter a PhD course directly. According to the Times Higher Education, 118 universities are listed in the world ranking. Maybe it includes 1,500 universities or so. And they said that about 5 to 7% of the top universities, but only 2 universities are ranked above 200. Maybe this is also the characteristic of Japanese university. The reason why is like with all, considering that important customers of the Times Higher Education, foreign students, for example, from China or India or somewhere. So one reason for low evaluation is low internationality of Japanese university, as both study and life in Japan require ability of Japanese language more or less. And especially in the field of social science and humanities. The Japanese language ability is very important. And my impression of a Japanese university is that they can offer moderate education at moderate fee. In reality, education fee is relatively low in comparison with United States or Australia or maybe UK. So, but it requires that students have enough language ability of Japanese. And this trend also applies to researchers in Japan. And its linguistic function, the barrier can act two ways. It can act as a barrier which weakens influence from outside, like the joke I spoke at first, and but at the same time prevents its outcomes from influencing outside. And my speech is approaching to the end. A relative independence, such a relative independence which Japanese academic system provides can keep in the diversity of disciplines research trend of the world. If researchers inside succeed in keeping communication channels open with outside, if they cannot, it's just segregation. I think I benefited from it, maybe this barrier. But today's situation is much severer, especially for younger generation. Anthropologists traditionally value cultural diversity, which can apply to diversity of anthropologists, whose importance is often referred to at international congress like uh, International Union of Anthropological and Ethnological Studies. At least anthropologists lay high value on diversity. Okay, my speech had come to an end. Thank you.